right. We ready?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to the January 6th Alternative Compliance Review Committee meeting. My name is Mary Kelly, and I am the chair of the ACRC. Today's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic meeting statute. The requirements of notice, access, and minutes are being met through electronic means. The public and the media are able to view this meeting on the city's Planning, Design, and Development YouTube channel. Next, I'd like to introduce our ACRC committee, our ACRC members. Committee members, feel free to wave to the audience if you're sharing your camera. David Walters.
Hello.
Eric Zavarol. Michael Paul James. Padma Balusu, and Toby Holmes. We'd like to start each meeting with a brief overview of the role of the ACRC, as well as the meeting structure for members of the public who are in attendance. The ACRC was established to provide recommendations on requests for alternative compliance for projects in the transit-oriented development, also known as the TOD Zone District. Alternative compliance allows the implementation of alternative and innovative design practices that meet the intent of the TOD districts and do not have a significant adverse impact on surrounding development. Alternative compliance is only allowed for select standards. Each standard shall be reviewed against its specific review criteria to determine that the alternative compliance meets each standard. No standard may be waived in its entirety. Our scheduled meeting time runs from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Committee members may request a brief recess between item reviews. Each agenda item will include the following: a brief presentation of the request and recommendation from city staff, no more than 5 minutes. A brief presentation of the request and any supporting information from the applicant, no more than 5 minutes, please. A public comment period for those in attendance to provide input on the item. This period will be limited to 5 minutes of discussion in support of the request and 5 minutes of discussion in opposition of the request. After the public comment period has been closed, the ACRC may question the applicant and ACRC staff members on the request. After the committee members have asked their questions, I will close the hearing for discussion and deliberation. The ACRC will then draft a recommendation for approval with modifications, or denial. Once a recommendation has been moved, I will do a roll call vote to capture each committee member's recommendation for our minutes. A final vote on the recommendation by the ACRC will close the hearing. Written comments on this request will be accepted after the meeting until 11:59 p.m. on January 7th. These comments should be sent to our staff liaison, Kirsty Sanchez, at Kirsty, Kirsty, .Sanchez, SANCHEZ, at charlottenc.gov. Comments should be limited to 375 words and will be provided to the Planning, Design, and Development Director before a decision is made on this request. Staff will forward any written comments along with the ACRC and staff recommendations to the Planning, Design, and Development Director, the PD&D, within 5 business days of the meeting. The PD&D Director will make the final decision on the request using the recommendations provided by staff and the ACRC. If alternative compliance is denied by the PD&D Director, nothing precludes the applicant from pursuing alternative options through filing an appeal with the Zoning Board of Adjustments, rezoning to TOD EX, or submitting a new request for alternative compliance. Before we get started, does anyone from the committee need to recuse themselves from any of the items on today's agenda? Hearing none, I'll move on. So for today's session, we have one request for alternative compliance on our agenda. This request is ACRC-2022-00001. and is for alternative compliance from section 15.2.1.c, which is the minimum building height. I'll invite staff to present the application and staff recommendations on this request. Kirsty, you have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mary. So as Mary mentioned, today we have a request for alternative compliance for the property at 501 East Moorhead Street. Here I have a zoning map that highlights the subject property in purple. You can see that the surrounding properties are zoned transit urban center, urban mixed use development, and our business district, and they include a mix of commercial and institutional uses. And then the applicant is proposing to construct a microbrewery here on the site. If you go to the next slide. So here I have a screenshot of the surrounding properties along Moorhead Street. You can see the subject property here, that one-story building will be demolished, and that's where the proposed brewery would go. And to the left, you can see the historic Maze House. And then to the right, we have a commercial building. If we could go to the next slide. So on this slide, we have a screenshot of the properties across Moorhead Street. We have the Dowd Y and then a mixed commercial office building. We go to the next one. So the applicant is requesting alternative compliance from section 15.2.1.c, which requires a minimum building height of 40 feet for new buildings in our TOD-UC zone district. And the applicant is proposing to construct a 16.5-foot tall building in order to preserve the public visibility of the abutting historic Maze House. And then the methods of alternative compliance that they're proposing include increased height of ground floor transparency and a canopy that acts as a roofline shadowing element. So go to the next one. So here we have a site plan. Again, on the left there, you can see the historic Maze House. And again, the applicant is proposing to construct a microbrewery on this site. You go to the next one. So here we have our building elevations along Moorhead Street and the courtyard. Again, the TOD standards require a minimum building height of 40 feet for new construction, and the applicant is proposing a building that's 16.5 feet tall. However, again, they're proposing increased height of ground floor transparency and a canopy that acts as a roofline shadowing element. Go to the next one. So this slide here really does a good job of highlighting the additional transparency that's proposed. So you can see it in that dark blue color. And as far as transparency requirements go, they only apply to the Moorhead elevation. But again, this slide does a great job of showing that additional transparency that's proposed to help meet the alternative compliance. We could go to the next slide. So the next couple slides here will just show some building renderings. So this is from the side of Moorhead Street that's closer to the Maze House. You go to the next one. And then this is on the other side of it. Again, we're looking at the building from Moorhead Street. And then the next one. And then this is just a view of the Maze House from the courtyard of the building. So go to the next one. So here we have the criteria that we use when we evaluate requests for alternative compliance when it comes to requests on minimum building height standards. So we're asking, does the site maintain compatibility with the adjacent developments and surrounding land uses? Does the site maintain pedestrian safety and walkability? And is a structure designed with additional architectural elements such as a parapet wall, increased height of ground floor transparency, roofline shadowing elements, and similar techniques to help maintain compatibility with the height of surrounding structures? So after reviewing the request and the criteria for alternative compliance, staff feels that the proposal does meet the criteria, and we are recommending approval of the request. In your agenda packets, you'll see that it also included 2 letters of support as well, and we do have a member from the public today who will be speaking on this as well. But that's all I have for now, Mary, so I'll turn it back to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Kirsty. All right, next I'll have David, if you'd like to speak as the applicant to present any additional information on the request. You also have up to 5 minutes to do so.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for hearing us this afternoon. I'll be brief because that was very thorough. Thank you, Kirsty. Just maybe mention just that you know, a lot of the impetus for the design of this proposed brewery, and there's also a restaurant function as well, was to celebrate the existing Maze House building that's next door. So we took a lot of care in organizing the building such that it kind of opened out and directly faced the historic building and worked to create this kind of common court where both the folks using the coming bed and breakfast type use that'll be in the Maze House can also use the courtyard along with the restaurant and the brewery. The building itself is we're very excited about it. It's a mass timber frame, so wood posts, wood ceilings, wood floors, all exposed, will be very beautiful, and then a lime washed concrete and a lot of glazing. So it's an attractive building. We're very excited about it and hope we can move forward. But I'll close with that. I don't have much more to add.
All right, thank you, David. We appreciate your input. All right, next, we did, as Kirsty mentioned, we received one request from the public to speak on this application. I'll invite now Myrick Howard with the Preservation of North Carolina to speak. Myrick, you have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance to speak. The Maze House is a real interesting house, and in 1993 it was landmarked by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Historic Landmark Commission. So almost 30 years ago it was landmarked. And a couple of years ago there was an application by the previous owner to demolish the building. So the 365-day demolition delay was put into effect in anticipation that the house would be demolished after the 1-year waiting period. We're very pleased that the partnership that David is working for decided to take on this project, and they bought the Maze House and the property across the street, and the street has been closed, as you see. But we have a preservation easement on the Maze House and the site next door. The preservation easement on the Maze House protects it, limits demolition, well, prohibits demolition. Let me be clear, no waiting period. It prohibits demolition. It prohibits certain kinds of changes. And on the building next door, where we went with that was putting a limit that the new building would be no taller than the existing building. We anticipated that the existing building would be demolished, and we wanted to make sure that the Maze House remained the dominant feature of that site. We have been involved in the design process extensively, had quite a number of meetings with the owners and with David to develop what you see today. We're real pleased with it. We think it fits very nicely. And as the maps show you, this particular site is basically, cut off by the freeway, so to speak, on the side and the back. So we feel like this is a really good answer to the problem that the Maze House was in, which was it's sitting on a piece of dirt that's way beyond its value as a historic property. And be glad to try to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Myrick. All right, now, so next, I'll allow the ACRC to ask staff or the applicant any follow-up questions on the request. I'd like to ask for the discussion to be kept relevant to the design standards related to this request and alternative proposed by the applicant. So do any of our members have any questions they'd like to ask at this time?
I would just ask
Michael? I think Michael had his hand up first. Yeah. I'm sorry, David, then I'll go to you.
I have a question. So you're still kind of blocking the view of the Maze House. If that's the whole premise, if you didn't make a short building in order not to block the Maze House, I don't really understand the reason that doesn't allow for a taller building. Could you elaborate on that?
Would you like for me or because I was involved with the easement side of things, which is really the limiting thing. It's not just blocking the view, it's dominating. A bigger building would have put the Mays House kind of in a hole.
Now, being it's across the street from a 7-story building, and does it make that, did you feel like it made that big a difference in the context of that street? Because the building you're replacing right now is the shortest building on both Moorhead and Caldwell for at least 3 or 4 blocks in every direction. So it was already the shortest building. So the building you're replacing is actually the most awkward one. So yeah, could you just elaborate on that a little bit more, like the design premise of why? Because across the street, like in the show the previous image, the other image. Like this one's a little misleading because there's actually a huge, no, that go back. There's a huge building. There's a 5-story building that you would be able to see from that view if you were standing on the site. So that'd be right behind it. So yeah, if you could just elaborate on that.
David, you want me, is appropriate for me to go ahead and continue with some comments?
Absolutely.
I'll probably just jump in really quick here. So what, as Myrick said, there was a historic easement that was put in as part of the Mays House that limits the height for new construction at 16.5 feet. The TOD-UC zone district would require the 40 feet. So again, alternative compliance does allow for us to, review projects that are proposing, not to meet that 40 feet, but they would have to meet the requirements, such as additional ground floor transparency, roofline shadowing elements. I don't really know what else I want to add on to that, but just wanted to kind of make sure that it was clear.
Thanks, Kirsty. Myrick, did you want to add something?
Well, a couple of thoughts for what it's worth is again, looking at this particular image, bear in mind that the new building is actually closer to the historic building than the existing building because of the closure of the street. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if you were talking about putting a 4-story building on that site, the historic buildings can be in a hole and not, and be thoroughly secondary to the bigger building. And the point here really is trying to preserve the building, the historic structure, and at least kind of giving it some room to, from a visual standpoint, to be there and have that presence. It really is a very significant property that's designated 30 years ago.
Thank you, Myrick. David, did you have a question?
Well, yes, following on, I don't think there's any, I think it's a false equivalence to say, a single-story building or a 4-story building. I don't think anybody is suggesting that you put a 4-story building next to the historic house. That would be sacrilege. But given the very interesting historic roof profile of the historic house, and the fact that as was pointed out, the visual representation doesn't give a really true representation, because you've got to think of the buildings, the office building and the YMCA and the mixed-use building, that in some ways it's the flat roof that bothers me. I see absolutely no architectural logic in the flat roof other than it's a simple solution. Because the historic house has an exaggerated roof profile, very recognizable, that one would think possibly that a more sophisticated architectural response would have some compatibility, be a companion building instead of a pancake. So, I mean, I'm sure the brewery and the restaurant's going to be fine. but it seems a really, really odd architectural response given this beautiful historic house, that it would seem much more responsive and much more in keeping with the spirit of the existing historic building to respond to its forms as opposed to completely ignore them. So, I mean, I'm glad something's going there, and the site plan is nice. I like many things about it, but the flat roof just seems so weird.
If I can respond from my end, in the review process, we spent quite a bit of time trying to set up so that from the new building, the visual that you see is the house and the view of, across the freeway. But in my dealings from a preservation standpoint, when you've got something this adjacent, so to speak, quieter is better than noisy from a design standpoint. From my standpoint,
I'm not suggesting noisy. I'm just suggesting better. Frankly, I mean, this is an incredibly.
David, if I may interrupt for a second, Mackenzie, could you bring up a slide of the new building rendering? Yeah, that one. Thank you. That's helpful. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, obviously this is subjective, and I'm not going to raise any objections. I'm not going to vote against this because, I mean, it's a good use of the site, excellent use of the site. It's simply that, as an architect, I'm sort of disappointed that it's a very passive response to history as opposed to an engaging one. It appears as if we're frightened of the historic building, and that to me is entirely inappropriate. That's all I'll say.
Any comments or questions?
Yes, I have a comment and a question, please. So to be clear, there's an underlying historic easement here that caps the height to 16.6.
And sorry, Toby, you're very difficult to hear. Could you get a little closer to your microphone,
Sure.
possibly?
So that I'm totally clear, there's a historic easement that lies under the site that requires the height to be capped at the height that's specified.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
So there's a historic easement, but the TOD-UC district would require the 40 feet. So it's kind of two conflicting.
Yeah, I understand that. No, I think the prevailing is the underlying historic easement to some extent. I mean, an easement on top of a zoning that's what that is.
Was there a question there or just a comment, Toby? I'm sorry.
Yes, the question was to understand more clearly if there's an easement that we're dealing with under the TO that is basically an overlay to the TOD district. Of course, if there's an easement there, either you're going to rezone it or repeal the easement, or just respect the easement through this process. And to me, it's crystal clear that, if there's a prevailing easement there, the 16.6, and they're going to respect that, and that makes sense regardless of roof line. That makes sense to me.
there is an easement, and it does limit the height of this new building to the height of the building that was there, which was 16 feet and change. So, I mean, in effect, from an IRS standpoint, we would be in a, shall we say, the proverbial hell of a mess if y'all said we've got to put this up as a 40-some story, 40-some foot building, because this was the basis of the easement.
So can you build, because of the easement, can you just build it by right? Why do you even need to come to us? That's what I don't understand, I guess now.
We do have to follow the local laws. So
Yeah, I see that, I quite understand the situation, and, Toby's quite correct that the easement probably takes priority over the TOD regs. And, you know, I don't think anybody's saying that we should build, 40 feet. It's simply that the easement shows the, when was that easement actually adopted, Myrick? When was the 16'6" adopted?
It was about 2 years ago, and it was after the 365-day demolition delay had run out on the house.
Okay.
So the house was subject to demolition at that point.
Okay. So, I mean, I quite understand that, terrified of losing that house because it's gorgeous. And, there's that rather humdrum little building next door to it. With hindsight, there might have been a better way of constructing the easement, but I mean, I guess that is history. We're stuck with it, and what we're left with is a very pleasant looking building in a very weird relationship to everything else. But I guess it's a pleasant building. It's not doing any harm. It's an urban lost opportunity. That it could be this could be an urban jewel with a much more responsive relationship. So, but I mean, yeah, everybody's hands are tied with the easement. So, yeah, I mean, okay, off we go.
Percy, I have one question for you as far as the legal grounds go. So if he built a 40-story building, they couldn't build that either because of the easement?
So as far as my review goes, if this were to come in for permitting right now, I would say that it needs to be a 40-foot building. So when we originally had an urban conceptual meeting on this site, that was one of my comments. And there were two options that the applicant could take here. It was one to either rezone the site to TOD EX, in order to keep this building height and respect the easement that's in place. Or the other one would be, well, there were three options really. Rezone it to TOD EX, meet the minimum 40-foot height requirement, or to bring it to the Alternative Compliance Review Committee. So that's why we're here today.
So they can build a 40-foot building and the easement can't stop that?
For my review, I need to follow what TODUC requires, and that would be 40 feet.
Thank you.
And from the easement, an easement such as this one is extensively under the IRS and part of the value of the easement is foregoing the higher development rights that are there.
Yeah.
This was a way, I mean, this house is a little bit of a sleeper, and the house itself, you don't really get the full. This is architect designed one of the few shingle style houses in remaining in Charlotte. There's a mill owner. Inside's really quite lovely. I mean, it sort of looks like Dutch colonial revival, and it isn't. It's really shingle style of a little bit earlier. Very fine house. And this was the way to figure out how to save it, is to at least make this lot buildable without making it dominant. I mean, the photographs that you're showing it from across the street. I mean, you see the shadow of the Y just, hanging over it. And this was a way of just kind of putting the house as the dominant thing on the site, setting up so that there's income for the, on the rest of the site. As I said, if y'all were to come back and say, that the only alternative is to go with a 4-story building, we would be in quite a mess in terms of dealing with the IRS.
Now, with the IRS, so basically what you're doing is if you build a taller building, you would forego the tax advantages of historic preservation. And that's what's lost if you build a taller building. Is that what I understand?
What you would forego, well, basically we would forego our tax exempt status. But other than that, the part of the valuation of the easement as a deductible item is the amount of development rights that you are foregoing, and that not just includes the so to speak, the difference between the 16 feet and the 40 feet. You could tear down the house. I mean, you know, if the normal market were at work with nothing else, so to speak, the house would go away, the existing building on the site would go away, and a 40-story building would be built on the whole site. And this is a way of trying to keep the house and keep the house from looking like it's sitting in a hole.
That's right. If I might jump in here, and I believe fully what you just said with regard to if you repeal for somehow and for some reason the historic district, which caps the height, not only would you have tax implications and everything else, we're certain to see both these buildings demolished, and 40 feet is obviously the limit, or the lowest limit that somebody would be built here. It would be sky high, and that's absolutely the Charlotte way. And I'm glad that you're going to be in a city that is aspirational in height, not always, but at the same time, you know, zoning appeals, variances, and alternative to compliance all have one thing in common, and that's a real hardship. You know, if you came in here to this committee and said, you know, basically there's no underlying easement, and it's just simply a case of I don't want to, or I don't have the money, or whatever it is, then that's not applicable in any way, shape, or form. But the commonality between all these things is the fact that there's legitimately a hardship, and a hardship you do not create for yourself, and an underlying kind of bundle of rights land use situation, which is basically the perfect recipe for allowing an alternative compliance, a variance, or a zoning appeal, whichever one of those flavors that are basically some sort of alternative to any zoning that's out there. And every city's got some process like this to circumvent the problem that this building is experiencing, which is legitimate. So to that end, I believe we have three options in this case, and I move to approve with the modifications that are suggested by you.
Great, thank you, Toby. I was just about to ask if someone wanted to make a recommendation. So Toby is recommended to approve. Is there a second or an alternative recommendation?
I will second it.
All right, thank you, David. All right. So at this time we have a motion and a second to approve the application. So what I'd like to do now is to have a roll call vote. So at this time, I'll go around the table. So Eric, approve with modifications, or deny?
I just approve.
Great, thank you. Padma Balusu? All right, I'll come back to Padma. All right, Michael Paul James?
Deny.
Toby Holmes?
Approve.
Thank you. David Walters?
Approve.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Padma. Do we have Padma back on the line?
We can't hear you.
Nope.
She's talking,
Can't hear
but
me?
we can't hear her. Padma's talking, but we can't hear her.
Is Mackenzie out there?
Padma gave a thumbs up, right?
I'm here. You're also welcome to enter it into the chat, and we can do it that way.
Yeah, there you go. If you could chat everyone, that would be great, so we could see your vote.
Where is the chat?
Okay, I can hear you now. So if you'll speak
Okay.
your answer.
Yep, I do approve. I'm good with the request and I approve.
Great, thank you, Padma. And I also approve. So at this time, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 approvals and 1 denial. So thank you. So with a vote of 5 to 1, the ACRC recommendation on this request is approval. That closes out our meeting for today. As I previously mentioned, written comments on this request will be accepted until 11:59 p.m. on January 7th. These comments should be sent to our staff liaison, kirsty.sanchez@charlottenc.gov. Comments should be limited to 375 words. Staff will forward any written comments along with the ACRC and staff recommendations to the Planning, Design, and Development Director. The director will make the final decision on this request. Thank you all for joining the virtual meeting and good discussion. David, I understand your comments on the character of the building, which I appreciate, but I think we had a good decision. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.